All right, welcome to the fourth episode of Nurtural Disaster. As always, I am your host, Benjamin Weingard, assistant professor at Hillsdale College, joined by my sidekick and second in command. He will soon be
I've been relegated to co-pilot.
Yeah, soon to be demoted to third in command as soon as we have a guest that's worthwhile on.
A more interesting person. Yes.
For now, until the podcast grows a bit, I'm stuck. So today what we're going to do is
You didn't know that I'm broadcasting as usual from an undisclosed location in a small Midwestern town.
That's right. Still undisclosed location, although rumor has it it might be close to Marietta,
People
Ohio.
have been claiming that. Also, worth noting that, yes, indeed, I am still unemployed.
Yes, still, and so far I'm still employed. We'll see. We'll see how this goes.
Yeah.
So today we're going to do our first discussion of a film, something that we intend to do more in the future, hitting such classics, hopefully, as John Ford's The Searchers, The Big Sleep, perhaps, and
Paul Verhoeven's RoboCop.
RoboCop would be actually a great film to discuss and analyze. But today what we're going to do is discuss the great film Dirty Harry.
Yes.
So
Dirty Harry, and to introduce it, I wrote a little summary to introduce the film for those who have not seen it. Clint Eastwood plays Harry Callahan, a laconic and cynical police officer with poor people skills and a perpetual glower, as he pursues a sadistic hippie killer called Scorpio, played with expert glee by Andrew Robinson. Along the way, Harry is stymied by squeamish and incompetent bureaucrats, including the utterly unimaginative mayor of San Francisco, played by John Vernon, and his always follow the rules police chief, played by John Large. Although relentlessly misanthropic, Harry works indefatigably and appears to adhere to some kind of no-nonsense code of justice, noting at one point, quote, that when an adult male is chasing a female with intent to commit rape, I shoot the bastard. That's my policy. Yet some have argued that Harry is little more than a thug, a bully who evinces a primitive eye for an eye mentality in a movie that is, as Roger Ebert put it, without doubt fascistic. But is Harry a reasonable response to liberal excesses in the 60s and rapidly increasing crime rates? Or is he, as his critics maintain, a fascistic vigilante fantasy who appeals to the lizard part of the right-wing brain, but who must be rejected by the civilized? Perhaps more importantly, is the movie any good? And what does it tell us about America in the 70s?
Good question. So before moving on, let's just take a little bit of a larger snippet out of the Ebert review that I think summarizes.
Just to set this up, how people perceived this movie at the time.
Yes. So Ebert notes the movie clearly and unmistakably gives us a character who understands the Bill of Rights, understands his legal responsibility as a police officer, and nevertheless takes retribution into his own hands. Sure, Scorpio is portrayed as the most vicious, perverted, warped monster we can imagine, but that's part of the same stacked deck. The movie's moral position is fascistic, no doubt about it. And I'll note also the probably the most famous movie, actually undoubtedly the most famous movie critic of the 20th century, Pauline Kael, noted that although it was a genre piece film, it's still fascistic medievalism, right? And then she also notes that you have to condemn Dirty Harry as a deeply immoral movie because it doesn't focus on the deprivation, human misery, and social injustice that actually causes crime.
Yeah, so instead of focusing on the tragedies that give birth to crime, it depicts criminals just as born sadists that need to be rid by heroes such as Dirty Harry.
Yes, and she laments in her review that the film doesn't go into more detail about how Scorpio is able to obtain his high-powered weapons, and instead he just uses them.
No, I see. So it's also a concern about gun control, apparently. Huh?
Yeah, so there's some concern about American gun culture in there for sure.
Yes, yeah. So point is that this is a film that was decried by its critics as fascistic, or I mean, the fascistic argument is perhaps on the extreme end. So let's say that many people decried it for promoting and at least defending vigilantism, right?
Yes. Yeah, and I think here it's useful to just kind of situate it into the cinema of the 1970s and note that when Dirty Harry came out in 1971, there were also many other films that were in some ways similar that came out around this time period, right? So it was preceded by Bullet, the also San Francisco detective film with Steve McQueen. It came out the same year that The French Connection came out, directed by the great William Friedkin, who also directed The Exorcist. In the United Kingdom, Get Carter came out in 1971. Well, no, in the most explicit of the vigilante films, Death Wish,
that comes out in 74.
Yeah, with Charles Bronson playing Paul Kersey. Also, the blaxploitation genre starts around it starts earlier, but 1971, Gordon Parks releases Shaft, which is probably the most well-known of the blaxploitation flicks. And also, we'll just note that Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange also came out in 1971, which, although not a gritty crime film, does depict a interesting view of crime in society that probably differs quite a bit from the preceding films of the 50s and 60s.
Right. Although interestingly, Kubrick criticizes the sort of attempt to reform criminals, the authoritarian and tyrannical attempt to reform them. Certainly something that Siegel and, not Siegel perhaps, but certainly something that Dirty Harry, the original film, doesn't have a lot of time for, nor does Death Wish. Yeah, it's interesting. So these films that are coming out in the, I guess you would say, the late 60s, early 70s, and then through the 70s are in fact a response to a real increase, a dramatic increase in violent crime. So this is a quote from Barry Latzer's The Rise and Fall of Violent Crime, which goes over crime in the, I guess it's actually since the Depression, World War II. He says, quote, "After 1965, crime rose to such heights that it frightened virtually all Americans and prompted significant alterations in everyday behaviors and even lifestyles. The risk of being mugged became an issue for Americans when they chose homes and schools, selected commuter routes, and planned leisure activities. In some urban locations, people were afraid to leave their dwellings at any time, day or night, even to go to the grocery store." So there really is this dramatic spike in crime, of course, which Nixon would famously respond to with the law and order presidency or presidential campaign that precedes these films and is worth keeping in mind. And also, these films come shortly after what would be considered a lot of liberal Supreme Court cases that gave criminal or suspected criminals more rights, such as Escobar and Miranda, both which are explicitly referred to in some of the more heavy-handed dialogue in Dirty Harry.
Yeah, so these films come out, I think it would be fair to say that this is the period that represents the kind of fracture of liberal hegemony that we would associate with the New Deal coalition through Lyndon Johnson, this kind of mainstream center-left liberalism that's viewed as ascendant, but was the 70s witnessed this kind of I think, retrenchment and then rollback in the 1980s, we could say.
What you'd call, I think we could call this like middle class backlash.
Yeah. Yes. And I think also, I think it's interesting that these films start portraying the criminal underworld in a very realistic way, a kind of in your face way. Whereas if you look at, I mean, most of the noir movies, they're kind of fantastical, and it's like this world that the average person's never going to deal with, right? The detective is the person who explores the criminal underworld so that you don't have to be immersed in it. Whereas if you look at, say, Bullet, Dirty Harry, etc., in these films, it's average citizens who are the victims of it and exposed to it on a day-to-day level and cannot avoid it.
The criminals are more depraved. In a lot of the noir films, you have sort of sophisticated criminals who are masterminds of something,
they're targeting other sophisticated
people
criminals
who are playing the game. Yes. Whereas, in Dirty Harry, you have innocent victims, of course. A 10-year-old African-American kid gets shot. A woman gets shot to start. So this is the sort of context of that. Perhaps we can bring this in where thematically germane as we sort of go, let's go over the film sort of from start to the finish, and then we can conclude with more of the debate about the movie. What does it represent? What does it tell us? How well is it executed, etc.
So we'll just know before getting into this as well that it was directed by Don Siegel, who is considered a top tier, maybe in the top 200 of all-time directors.
That might be a stretch. But he has some, has Invasion of the Body Snatchers is one of his classic films.
Yeah, and he has Coogan's Bluff, Two Mules for Sister Sarah.
The Shootist comes later, right? Yeah,
The Beguiled. The Shootist is most notable as John Wayne's last movie role. Yeah, actually an exceptionally well done film. So Siegel's known for sci-fi prison break type films and this Dirty Harry. He was considered a very workmanlike, competent director.
Right.
And I think Dirty Harry's probably is his crowning artistic achievement, I'd say.
I of his oeuvre, I've only seen maybe 3 or 4 films.
Okay.
Out of those, I mean, I would say Invasion of the Body Snatchers is the one that I like the most, but Dirty Harry's probably the most well-directed and aesthetically pleasing. Also, the cinematographer, I think it was Bruce Surtees, who was the sort of director of photography, a good cinematographer. And the cinematography is it's kind of a gritty, but at times
artsy.
Yes, artsy
with some nice zoom shots, especially the zoom shots of the barrels of guns feature
zoom
heavily.
Shots, and then a lot of zoom out shots from a helicopter, which sort of set up the you know that's a camera maneuver that was often copied.
Yes, and also the film is very localized in San Francisco.
Yes.
There's a lot of helicopter shots, a lot of shots from rooftops, showing the bay. One of the best shots in the film shows Harry Callahan looking at the Golden Gate Bridge
in a somber cerulean, dark cerulean background. Yes. So I guess the important thing to know is people think of Dirty Harry as a kind of action, vigilante action film.
Yes.
But it's actually like a very well done, well directed, also well scored by Lalo Schifrin, a jazzy soundtrack. And well scored film.
I think the actual artistic nature of the film, how well it's put together and how well it's acted, is part of the reason that it really triggered Cale, Ebert, and other liberal critics, because they could see how actually effective it was, as
Right.
opposed to some piece of trash like exploitation film from the 70s.
It's not Drac, right? And in
No.
fact, in this, it's similar to 1974's Death Wish, which also is known for being kind of this just action vigilante film, but is actually a very well directed, well crafted film. Now, you can argue the dialogue is over the top didactic, of course.
Yes.
But I mean, you compare it to Eli Roth's atrocity of a film with Bruce Willis.
Yes.
There's really no comparison. So these a couple of these films, at least, Bullet is another one. These are quite well done films.
Yes, and The French Connection, let's not
which
forget.
is probably the best of all of those films. By the way, the Bullet, Dirty Harry, and Zodiac, of course, all took inspiration from, I think his name is David Tachi, who is a police officer in San Francisco who was pursuing the Zodiac killer.
Okay.
Depicted by Mark Ruffalo in Fincher's Zodiac. And if you notice, Steve McQueen has the same holster setup that Ruffalo had in Zodiac, because they were mimicking this police officer who was rather like charismatic, known for being kind of flamboyant. Dirty Harry's connection to him's a little less clear, but actually there's a scene in Fincher's Zodiac in which Tashi's watching Dirty Harry, and he says to Jake Gyllenhaal, like, they're already making movies about it, because of course the Scorpio killer who's depicted in Dirty Harry is based a little bit on the Zodiac killer.
Yeah.
Interestingly, the script was written by a husband and wife, I believe, and was actually set originally in New York, and then it got elaborated over and over. And they had many different people were set to play Harry Callahan.
That's right.
So Frank Sinatra at one point,
he was apparently hurt and couldn't play the role.
Right. And then they had they asked like a bunch of other people who were prominent, including they got to Paul Newman, who disliked its politics, said that politics were too right-wing for him, but in fact recommended Eastwood. When Eastwood got onto the project, he went back to the original script more. So got away from all of the elaborations and went more to the basics.
And it was rumored that it was also offered to John Wayne, who rejected it because it was too violent.
Yes, that's right.
It just shows you something about John Wayne as a
you don't shoot people in the back, John Wayne.
John Wayne's actually like this was very puritanical about his image in films, which I find somewhat interesting.
Yes. So although we associate this role, this is probably Clint Eastwood, even though he's been in so many important and culturally resonant films. This is probably like the paradigmatic Eastwood character.
Yeah, and I would say the greatest of the modern Eastwood films, namely Gran Torino, is something of a reflection upon his man without a name character, but also especially the Dirty Harry character.
Yes, right. So that's Eastwood later in his career becomes meta and makes films that reflect upon his own film character. So Unforgiven is definitely a reflection on his Western characters. In Gran Torino, where he has lines such as "Get off my lawn," clearly a reflection on the Dirty Harry character. And in fact, in some sense, a criticism of the Dirty Harry character. And
there's something of an argument that both the Walt Kowalski and Harry Callahan characters, at least Harry Callahan in the first Dirty Harry, they're both Christ-like martyr figures in a way.
Yes, and
one could make the argument.
Well, in Gran Torino, the symbolism is absolutely in your face, right? Like very clearly, when he is killed, when the camera pans out, it's clearly making a Christ comparison. The Dirty Harry symbolism's a little bit more odd. Well, we'll get to that. So
yes. And then just so one other note, I do think this is interesting. Looking at Bullet, which is the clearest precursor to Dirty Harry, they are both very much set in San Francisco.
Yes.
In fact, wouldn't make sense elsewhere,
Right.
because the famous car chase scene in Bullet only
Yes.
works on the sinuous and winding San Francisco streets.
Yes, that is right. And they, as I noted, they're both based at least loosely on the San Francisco police officer, and they're both taciturn, right?
Yes, yeah.
Both McQueen's cop and Eastwood's cop say very little.
And I would also
You would
note,
say Bullet's a little more minimalist, and it has
Yeah.
less of a clear political point.
Bullet has more of a European feel. For
Yes.
sure. But something that's interesting about both Dirty Harry and Bullet is neither of the films, although they deal with a lot of themes that are noir, neither of them have the noir feel to them, right?
Yeah,
They don't play with like the shadows and lighting in the same way.
No, but I've seen Dirty Harry called a neo-noir.
Yeah.
I don't really like that classification, but I think even Wikipedia calls it a neo-noir.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there are similarities that
There are
run through them,
elements.
but it definitely, like, if you've watched classic noir, like Out of the Past, Laura, The Maltese Falcon, The Big
Double
Sleep,
Indemnity.
this doesn't have the same tone or feel to it at all.
No, it does not.
Okay, so let's get into the opening of the film, because I think this is interesting how they decide to open the film by zooming in on the wall at the San Francisco Police Department and dedicating it to the memory of San Francisco police officers who have lost their lives in the line of duty.
Right. So very clearly, right away, you get the sense that this is sort of a pro-law enforcement film.
Yes. I don't think you just get the sense, it's right in your face.
Right, it is in your face.
As we open, think about that blue line, man.
Right. And it goes from that, it cuts from that immediately to this jazz score and a gun, right? You see the gun.
But I think the cut is interesting because it zooms in on a San Francisco police officer badge, and then immediately cuts over to the barrel of Scorpio's gun staring right at the camera.
Right. So it's a
kind
great,
of
it's a great cut, right?
Yeah.
Because it tells you everything. You have the badge, and that's the thing that's protecting you from
the gun.
Right.
And I think the first 10 minutes of the film are brilliant because they set up all of the themes that you're going to follow throughout the rest of the film.
Right.
And also, not only does the badge indicate, hey, this is protection versus the gun, but also it sets up the fundamental antagonism between law and order and this like psychotic hippie killer.
Right. But also on top of that, even because it ends with Eastwood throwing his badge, you could argue that there might be a little bit of a meditation on what the badge should mean and the way that the bureaucracy gets in the way of police officers who are trying to do their job. So there's a lot, it's cinematically, thematically rich right away. It does a very good job of getting you in immediately. And this person who's on the roof, who's, we learn later, is Scorpio, played by Andrew Robinson, who's a great pick to play him. He's this kind of cherubic, he's got this angelic face, which is perfect for the role. And Eastwood took him, recommended him based on work he had done
on the stage.
The stage, yeah.
Yeah.
And so
he's got a very a feminine mean to him.
Yes.
And kind of a hysterical.
And he behaves that way histrionically throughout, in a very weird and kind of off-putting and disturbing way, right?
Yes. Yeah. And importantly, I think that this is a decision that was smart. They don't give Scorpio a backstory at all.
Right,
Like
right.
we don't understand any of his motivation.
Right. And when they throw you into the film, we don't know anything about him. We don't even know he's Scorpio yet. You just see him with his gun, and he looks through, and they have a lot of these shots where he's looking through the scope at his
Yep.
potential victims, and he's
Yes.
looking at an attractive woman who's swimming in a pool, and he shoots her.
Yep.
And that's the start scene, right? So
Yep.
she's been shot.
And then Callahan arrives on the scene, and there are some pretty nice artsy shots from unique angles of him as he climbs up the building, and
Yes.
he puts one of the shells in evidence.
Yes.
And interestingly, there's no dialogue either for the first 5.5 minutes. It's just
that's a good point.
Yeah.
So I wonder if there was, and if it got cut out, because one thing that Eastwood is good at doing is, he was good at this in the Man with No Name trilogy, right? It's just cutting his dialogue.
Yes.
It's like the more dialogue we can cut, the better.
Yep.
And so this continues that.
And also having it start with Scorpio on the top of the building allows you to take in the kind of mise scene of the San Francisco skyline, right?
Yes.
Which
right.
is kind of, again, a theme throughout the film.
Right.
So the first scene where we have any dialogue is Harry and his colleagues reporting to the mayor about what's going on with this
Right.
Scorpio killer.
Right.
And I think I'll just note some of the dialogue here, because again, this kind of sets up a theme throughout the film. So Harry comes into the office, into the mayor's office. The mayor asks him, let's have it, Harry. What? Your report, what have you done? And then Harry retorts, for the past quarter hour, I've been sitting on my ass in your outer office waiting on you, right? So
right.
Immediately we have the Harry would be getting shit done, but the bureaucrats that run the show with
right.
their paperwork and you have to schedule a meeting and this and that, slow things down and kind of gum up the works.
Yes, that is correct. And but isn't there before this, right? Don't we get the description of the note Scorpio left?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I skipped past that.
Okay,
so yes,
so just really quickly, because this will come up, we get a note from the killer. He left it up on an antenna, and it says he's going to shoot an African American, although it uses a derogatory term for that, or what?
A Catholic priest.
A priest, yeah. So right away we get the sense that this guy is sadistic, and he's weird because he's depicted as this kind of weird hippie, but he's also seems to be racist and sexist.
And
he's homophobic, perhaps,
and a religious
maybe
bigot,
gay, and a religious bigot. Yeah, so it's just this weird combination of all of these disgusting traits.
Yeah, Scorpio really is kind of the embodiment of everything that a conservative would find disgusting about the 1960s, right?
Right. And we should say, moving throughout this film, we'll just see we can get to that when we get to the famous hot dog eating scene. So yes, Eastwood says, I've been wasting my time sitting waiting for you.
Yep. And then as he's leaving, there's more of this famous dialogue, because the mayor stops him when Harry's on his way out and says, I don't want any trouble from you like we had last year in the Fillmore district. You understand? And Callahan then makes the famous response, yeah, well, when an adult male is chasing a female with intent to commit rape, I shoot the bastard. That's my policy. And the mayor asks him, well, how did you know? And then Harry
explains it graphically.
Yes, he has this graphic retort. And then Harry leaves and the mayor says, I think he's got a point. What I find interesting about this is the idea here is that Harry Callahan stands for common sense justice, right? Like, dude, screw your bureaucratic niceties. obviously I know I used my common sense instinct and I knew what was going on, right?
Right.
And at first, the mayor seems to accept that there might be some wisdom to that perspective.
So this is something that actually disappoints me about the film, is that the mayor becomes more unimaginative and kind of impotent as the movie proceeds.
Yes.
And you actually, this first scene, you think maybe this mayor will be a politician who kind of gets it.
Right.
And you could see he would sympathize with Harry, but he actually doesn't later on.
Yes, as we'll see, he becomes more craven and
well,
feckless.
not even, I mean, even worse than that, as we'll get to, when
almost sympathetic toward Scorpio.
Right. But yes, I think this is important because it's definitely like a kind of populist theme that plays, and we'll talk, because he gets a partner shortly after this. So the populist theme we have here is Harry, who's not educated. He's not book educated. He's street educated.
Right.
And he's saying, I'm not with these lawyers and these hyper educated people who make all of these fine distinctions. I'm just about common sense, human justice. I relate to the people, right?
Yeah, he's not one of the pointy headed bureaucrat liberals who have taken over all of the cities in the United States.
Right, exactly. So this is important character. So we already notice how economical the film is. We'll criticize the script in places, but the script works really well here just to get us, okay, we already know everything we need to know. We have Harry's character laid out before us in a matter of like 1.5, 2 minutes, right?
Yep.
We know what we've got with Harry.
Yeah.
We know what the fundamental conflict is going to be as well.
Yes. And well, it's interesting because we can see from the start, the fundamental conflict is between the badge and the gun, right? Between law and disorder. But what's interesting is that the Scorpio side of it, the evil, is not constrained by anything. Whereas we'll see throughout, right, that the point is the badge is constrained.
Right,
and
that will
play
fundamental,
right, because that plays a role in understanding also the last scene, that, you know, it's almost this kind of meditation on the Western, right? In the Western, you have the badge and the gun, and neither of them are constrained, and you can just have old school justice. Here, Callahan wants to have that kind of old school justice and just duke it out, but he's constrained at every single point of the way, whether it's by he has to have a partner or bureaucrats,
he has to follow
or
rules,
stupid things such as the Bill of Rights. I mean, just nonsense, the Fourth Amendment.
We can make arguments about whether he's really violating the quote unquote Bill of Rights, or whether he's making fair criticisms of liberal excesses, giving criminals rights that perhaps they shouldn't have, etc. That's an interesting conflict. But
after all of these kind of tensions and themes are economically developed, we get to another scene that I think is a great establishing scene. And in fact, the scene where he dispatches the bank robbers was so popular and successful that they replicated it in like transformed it, but replicated the basic structure in at least the second Dirty Harry film. And so it's just they hit on this.
The third, whatever. It's like the Home Alone scene where he has the movie and he orders the pizza and he plays the movie, the soundtrack, like you got 10 seconds to get your yellow no good keister, and they just did the same one in the second one. It's basically like that. It's so cool. Now, I think this is important because it also illustrates that Dirty Harry is actually a pretty funny film.
Yes.
This is something you wouldn't think about, you know, if you just heard Dirty Harry, you don't think about the humor, but actually it's pretty humorous too.
Yeah. So in this scene, Harry is just driving around the city, stops off at his favorite place to get food. It's just like some low-key hamburger hot dog place. Right. Notices that there's a car parked outside of the bank that's running, goes in, they have good, there's good dialogue between him and Jaffe, the guy behind the counter, right? Because they know that it doesn't matter whether it's lunch or dinner. Harry always gets the same fucking thing every time. It's just a hot dog with with ketchup and mustard. Because he's one of the people. He doesn't eat at fancy restaurants.
Right.
And then they engage in some banter that demonstrates how great of a detective Harry is, because he recognizes that there's a bank robbery that's going to be in progress. Right. And my favorite is when he asks Jaffe, he's like, is the car still running? And Jaffe asks him, like, how would I know? And he's like, the exhaust coming out of the muffler. Right. Like that's some difficult detective work or something. Right.
So
and then they also just note there, they also make a kind of humorous comment. Jaffe says something about how it's terrible that there's so much pollution coming from the exhaust. Right. Which is just not really important, but just some comment on kind of liberal environmentalism.
Perhaps. And it's so Harry's such a good detective that he just notices a car sitting in front of a bank and realizes that there's a robbery in progress. Tells this guy to call the police and tell them there's a robbery in progress, but then says to himself, basically, I hope I can eat my food before anything goes down. And he takes a bite of his hot dog, and then the alarm sounds. Right. So he goes out while still chewing his hot dog and shoots somebody in a getaway car, and the car flips. And then he I think before that he shot this other guy, and then he walks up to this guy whom he shot earlier. And the guy's like thinking about grabbing his gun, and that's when Harry gives his incredibly famous, probably the most famous dialogue in the Dirty Harry series, which I will give the verbatim.
I will give the verbatim quote. Right. So Harry says, I know what you're thinking. Did he fire 6 shots or only 5? To tell you the truth, in all the excitement, I've kind of lost track myself. But since this is a 44 Magnum, the most powerful handgun in the world, and would blow your head clean off, you've got to ask yourself one question. Do I feel lucky? And then importantly, this time when he recites it, he says, well, do you, punk? Kind of calmly and with a little bit of a grin on his face.
Yeah, I would say it's drawl. He's actually like he's just kind of being sarcastic and comical.
He's having a good time with it. Right. You can tell he's happy with himself.
Yes. And then I would change there's a word there that you changed. You said since, but he actually says, but being.
That's
which right. I think is important because it just illustrates this is how this guy talks, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So he says, but being that this is a 44 Magnum, I don't know where or who thought that a 44 Magnum would blow a head clean off.
Or that it was the most powerful handgun in the entire world.
This sounds like John Milius's dialogue.
Yeah, he's credited as coming up with it.
Okay, yeah, because it's like over the top. It's kind of ridiculous. I mean,
it's very ridiculous. And also I like in this instance, the bank robber doesn't reach for the gun and then says, well, I gots to know if there was actually another bullet. And then Harry points the gun at him again, pulls the trigger, and it just clicks that there actually was not another bullet in the chamber.
And I think he kind of like even smiles or something.
Yeah, it's just an absurd scene. It's action.
It's very amusing, though. And again, it illustrates how much of a badass Harry is, because he does all of this while he's eating a hot dog.
Without even... No, his leg gets injured.
He gets shot, too. So he goes and gets cleaned up at the doctor.
We'll also note that there's all kinds of collateral damage here, and many dozens of people's lives put at risk because Callahan refused to wait for the police to arrive.
To be fair, for the cavalry to arrive, as he says. But to be fair, he does say, doesn't he say halt or stop or something?
Yes. So they make a point of having Harry says stop, and then the bad guy shoots at him. The bad guy, quote unquote, shoots at him first. But still, it's an absurd, like over the top scene. It's not police work done by the books. Let's
no,
say.
it is not. No, it is not.
But
it
again,
is, obviously, it gives rise to this most famous dialogue, which will be replayed differently, though. And I think this is where I don't know if it was Eastwood or Siegel who realized that he should say it differently the first time and the second time, but it was a great decision, whoever made the decision.
Because definitely the first time that he's doing this, he's not really jaded, right? He's having a good he's making a joke, and it's almost jocular. He hates the bureaucrats, they restrict him, but he's at this point happy with his job and having a good time and just shooting some bad guys, as you do.
Right.
And also we'll note that after this scene, he's getting treated by a doctor because he got shot in the leg, and just setting this idea that Callahan's this working class hero. When he's in with the doctor, they want to cut his slacks off, and he says, nah, I'm not going to let you do that. They cost, $29 for that. I'm going to save my pants. I'll take them off. And then he makes a crack about, you can turn your back if you're embarrassed, because Callahan's such a man that he doesn't get embarrassed by anything.
That's right.
Now, we'll just note that this also, not only is it setting the scene for Callahan being kind of your everyman blue collar type, but also points out the disastrous effects of inflation in the 70s and 80s, because this is a nice pair of slacks, and they're only $30, which would be a steal in 2020.
That is true. I heard that he said something like $29 or something. I was like, man, those are nice slacks for $29.
$29.50.
Stagflation was a real killer in the 70s.
Yeah, the liberals and unions really ran shit into the ground there.
They sure did. So after this, Harry is then, so this is another important thing that happens. He gets a partner, right? I think that's the next thing that happens is his movie. He comes in and he's given this partner. And of course, he's angry about this because he's Harry.
Yes.
And the partner is Chico Gonzalez. Yes. And of course, he makes some racial comments about him at a later point. But what's interesting about this partner is that it allows Siegel, the script writers, Eastwood, to make more forcefully the point about Eastwood being just a common sense guy, and contrasting him with the educated, because Gonzalez, his new partner, has a degree in sociology. And Harry says to him, he kind of mocks him for having a degree in sociology. Right?
He says, specifically, he asks him, he says, just what I need, a college boy, get your degree. And then Chico says, sociology. And then Harry makes a crack. Sociology, you'll go far if you live.
Right. And so, I mean, to come up with sociology, so it's important to think about in the 60s and 70s, like with the Great Society, right? The people who were like, dude, we really need to understand what causes crime. All criminals are like created by social injustice. They're not born that way. This was spearheaded by sociologists. So it's interesting that they choose to have this police officer have a degree in sociology. And obviously, this is why Callahan has contempt for the degree.
And it's also interesting because it's indicative of the prestige of sociology at the time.
Right now,
sociology was high flying, functionalism, Talcott Parsons.
Right. This is cutting edge. This is how we understand this city. Right. Now, if you said sociology, you just chuckle about it.
Right. Now it would definitely be a degree in economics or something, one of the cooler of the social sciences.
Right. So, but
this also sets up a kind of theme that's sporadically played upon in the film, which is, why is he called Dirty Harry?
Yeah,
right? Because Chico's really,
yes.
yeah. So go ahead with that.
Well, so you can see that this was some kind of idea in the script that they play with a lot in the first half, at least, which is, why is he called Dirty Harry? And
yes.
his partner says, he says he has a question, and he asks this other guy, or he asks Harry, why are you called Dirty Harry?
Yeah, and the other cop interjects and says, well, that's one thing about Harry. He doesn't play favorites. He hates everybody. And then they use a bunch of ethnic slurs
that we won't use here.
Yes, and then Chico says, well, how does he feel about Mexicans? The cop kind of laughs and says, ask him. And then Harry says, especially, and then makes a ethnic slur toward Mexicans, but then also winks at the other cop. Like, this is just male bonding. It's all in good fun. This is just how we roll. Another thing that's interesting about that scene is it's almost like different characters, but almost literally played out the exact same way in Gran Torino in the barber shop.
That's right. I was going to say that. That's a theme that Eastwood comes back to in Gran Torino, in a scene in which this barber and the main character, well, the barber Walt and Tao are in the barber shop, but the barber and Walt have this relationship in which they rip each other and they mock each other for being Polish, etc.
Italian and Polish,
And Eastwood clearly is attracted to quote unquote political incorrectness. And
political incorrectness and his view of traditional masculinity, which entails
being able to rip each other and just make jokes about racial stuff. It to him, it's not a sign of prejudice. It's rather a sign of like, be one of us. We just rip each other for this kind of stuff. And importantly about Harry is that the whole point is actually he's not prejudiced. He hates everybody.
Yeah, he's a misanthrope. He's not prejudiced against any particular group of people.
Right.
Is he sexist? Yeah, probably. But that's a different story, right?
Well, so, I mean, some people would say so. We can get into that. Yeah. So we have this. Why is he called Dirty Harry? Well, maybe one reason he's called Dirty Harry, at first the answer is because he hates everybody.
Yeah, it seems to be because he's this misanthropic loner who just hates the world.
Yes.
And then, so I think here we move to it turns a little bit into like almost like a chase film or like a caper where they just start driving around looking for Scorpio. Would you say
but that's after the shootout, right?
The shootout
on the building. So they're on the building. Does that come later?
Yeah, that comes later. First, they go out patrolling.
Okay.
And then also, so there's the patrol, the peeping Tom scene we'll get into.
I thought that was after, because how do they know that he has a tan briefcase?
No, this is before they go on surveillance. Oh, you're talking about when the next Scorpio attempted shooting?
Yeah.
Yes, but not the one. Harry and Chico are not in this next.
Oh, that's right. The helicopter just they have a bullhorn through the helicopter.
That's right. And so there's the next scene after this. It's Scorpio again on a rooftop identifying another set of victims. A police helicopter spots him.
No, this is important. It's a black guy, right? And it seems as though he's probably gay because I think he's eating ice cream with another guy.
Yeah, the Scorpio's victim that he's looking at.
Scorpio's victims. It's one of the weird things running through this is there's a kind of like sense of depravity and that's illustrated by homosexuality. Right? This seems to be what illustrates how seedy and unseemly San Francisco has become, right?
Yeah, it's almost as if it's they're trying to tell you this is what happens when the liberals take over, right?
Right.
Just a bunch of fairies and faggots run around the
Yeah,
city.
quote unquote, right? Because
Yes.
I mean, from their, it's interesting because very few people have drawn attention to this so far as I could tell. I didn't see a lot of people commenting on this, but I don't think it's gratuitous that they do this. And I think wouldn't you argue that the criminals in Death Wish seem kind of effeminate and weird too?
Yes. Yeah. I agree with that. So they're using homosexuality as a sign of a larger underlying kind of degeneracy, I think, which is it's kind of interesting because Siegel is a dyed-in-the-wool like New Deal Democrat, right? And kind of took the political criticism personally.
Yes.
But I find it's hard for me to imagine that you would not be aware of the symbolism here as the director.
Yes, and Eastwood later, I mean, I think he was even on Ellen saying he was for gay marriage because he was just like keep the government out of people's business. So Eastwood personally has a kind of more social libertarian view of the world. So it's not clear exactly. I mean, maybe they just think it's a kind of like immoral, flamboyant homosexuality. It's hard to know, right? But
yeah, hard to know, but they play that up. And also
in there,
the Scorpio character clearly is
also kind of effeminate and off in some sense. So we had this scene. So that's how they figure this scene is he's thinking about shooting or he's actually preparing to shoot.
Yeah, he's getting ready to shoot. He's putting his gun together.
Yeah, this black person. And then the police helicopter interrupts him and he gets away.
Yes.
And they know he has this tan briefcase or whatever they say. Which
so
is
then Harry and Chico go patrolling for this. And I'll note they make the comment in the vehicle when we're driving. Chico makes some comment about it's crazy that the helicopter they let him go, and then Callahan makes the comment or the retort, that's probably because they were talking rather than looking. Right. So we'll note that it's not just the liberal bureaucrats who run the city who are destroying it. It's also the increasing effeminacy of the police department that's a problem.
I would say maybe here it's not it's people who don't understand the street. So he's rebuking Chico for talking. He's basically saying, shut up and look.
Right. But I'd say that, and we'll see this happens later in the film as well. There's a concern perhaps that the police officers, they're just people who are good at sucking up and being deferential, and they're not masculine anymore, right? They're not good officers.
That's fair, and that theme runs throughout, which is why in the third entry into the Dirty Harry, he actually gets a female partner, which is some sort of commentary on this attitude toward women and this masculinity that runs through the Dirty Harry series. So yeah, that's fair. And this scene is weird because at some point they think they have found Scorpio, and Harry gets out and chases him.
Yep.
And then he gets on this trash can and he thinks he saw him go in somewhere, and he's looking in.
Yep.
And there's a what we presume is like this woman's boyfriend or husband who came home
with a tan briefcase.
And then they're like start making out or something, and then she's getting naked, and then he falls, and then there are a bunch of people on the ground or something.
Yeah, there are just like neighborhood folks out at night in the back alley. Right. And they accuse Harry of being a peeping Tom.
Right. And actually they looking kick his ass.
Apparently this apartment that he was looking in the window of, it's notorious. The woman in there, her name is, they call her quote unquote Hot Mary.
Right.
And
So
apparently she walks around in this apartment topless frequently.
Right.
So they accuse Harry of peeping on her, and then they rough him up a bit.
Right. And then Chico comes and he gets them off of him. And Harry said, just let him go.
Yeah, because I think the point there is Harry, this is common sense justice again. Harry can't blame them for roughing him up because that's what the average, decent citizen would do if you're peeping in a window. You get your ass kicked a bit.
Right. So Chico's following the basic dude, they're assaulting a police officer, whereas Dirty Harry Callahan's like, they didn't know this is his common sense thinking. They didn't know I was a cop. They thought I was probably peeping. Just let him go. And then Chico says, maybe I have this other reason why they call you Dirty Harry, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So this theme comes up where they're trying to figure out, well, why is this guy called Dirty Harry?
Maybe he's dirty because he has this kind of prurient side that Chico was unaware of. No, then they get called to handle a male, middle-aged male who's threatening to jump off a building.
Right. So this is the very same night, after this happened, they get this call about this potentially suicidal male.
Yep.
And Eastwood, or Dirty Harry, Eastwood, goes up. He's on the 22nd floor, they say, or whatever. So Eastwood zooms up there on their crane. And in fact, this scene was directed by Eastwood, at least according to what I read.
Okay.
And Eastwood does typical Dirty Callahan stuff, which is instead of telling this guy, please don't jump off, like what's going on, he just says, when I need to see your driver's license, because when people jump, it just makes a hell of a mess. You can't even tell what identify arms and legs. I can't identify them. So I need it. The guy, I guess he gets mad at him at one point and then jumps
at him.
Right.
And then Harry punches him in the face and knocks him unconscious. They zoom down.
Very implausible action, but whatever.
Yes. And then that's when Harry says, now you know why they call me Dirty Harry, because I get every, crap ass job that comes along.
They give me the shit jobs. So this scene, I'm actually would be perfectly happy if they cut it. It really doesn't do a lot.
It was added, I suppose, as some combination of humor and perhaps just to establish more that Dirty Harry is a badass.
Yeah, I think what you could argue, like the plus side for it, is that it illustrates how even though Callahan's a misanthrope, he gets the job done and actually ends up helping people even while being like rude and berating them. So I think
arguably he's actually favorable toward the small guy.
Right. So that would be like the sort of positive on this scene if you were going to argue for including it, and it goes with the why is he called Dirty Harry?
Yes. And so after this scene where he saves the would-be jumper, that's when they go to do surveillance. They have a lead on, and this also is interesting because they believe that it's
first the young boy got shot, right?
Oh yes, I'm sorry. Yeah,
so it moves from this to we get this 10-year-old black kid was killed by Scorpio,
shot in cold blood, and
they find the shell right on the rooftop.
It's another 30-06,
right. And that's when they do the stakeout.
Yeah, and they have Chico look at you don't see it as the viewer, but they have Chico sees the boy's body and it just cringes.
He can't handle it.
He can't handle it. Callahan stares at it with stoic detachment.
And Callahan says, I think he says, "Welcome to homicide" to Chico.
Yes.
Yeah. And this is interesting. So right after this, there's this scene in which Chico's looking at the pattern of the shootings, the map, and he says, there's no way he would go. Why would he go back to the same building?
Right.
because that's where they're going to put the stakeout. Why would they go back there? So again, it's pitting Callahan's intuition and
Yeah.
common sense against this educated person's idea that nobody would do that. And Callahan
using charts and data, but
right.
Callahan's instinct is superior.
Right. So Callahan senses that, in fact, he will go back to the same building, and that's what we need to watch when we do the stakeout.
Yeah. So they go to the same building, and we'll note here again, Callahan has a peeping Tom moment here.
The second peeping Tom moment.
So when he's on the rooftop, he's looking in an apartment, and there is what appears to be a teenaged or at least a woman in her, let's say, early 20s who's naked, walking around, and then like 3 of her friends knock on the door, and she lets them in. They're all hippies, right? Very stereotypical hippies.
Yeah.
And then Callahan's kind of lingering on the woman a bit more than he should be, and then he actually talks to himself and makes the quip, "You owe it to yourself to live a little, Harry."
Right.
Which I'm not sure, but I do find interesting that kind of theme of voyeurism, either through Callahan looking at unsuspecting naked women or Scorpio looking through his scope at victims.
Thinking, when does Rear Window come out?
That's in the 50s, right?
Right.
Like
so
57, 58, something like that.
This is after Rear Window. And
yes.
There is this weird, there is this voyeurism that plays throughout, and also like sexuality.
Yeah, sexuality.
There are a lot of naked women, and a criticism of female behavior or female sexuality, or at least an ambivalence toward it. And this woman...
ambivalence, but it's also interesting because the female sexuality it's private if you wouldn't have these voyeuristic males trying to intrude.
In this case, though, actually, she lets her hippie, she's naked completely, and she lets these hippie friends in as if like, what up, just come in. And again, there's a sort of running, like, if you're a conservative in the 70s and you watch this, you're just like, yeah, that's what these disgusting liberal hippies do.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So that doesn't run throughout, and that is interesting.
Yes.
And then he sees the door open or whatever, or shut on the way to the roof, and he tells Chico to hit the lights and shine them at Scorpio. And then he flat out attempts to assassinate Scorpio.
Yes, yes, he does.
So he has a sniper rifle, and he just tries to kill the guy he thinks is the criminal. Of course, he misses. And then this is one of the more implausible action scenes, because apparently Scorpio has why he has this full assault rifle with him too doesn't really make sense, because we've never seen it. He's usually sniping people from.
No, that's a fully automatic.
Fully automatic,
rifle,
fully automatic. So he starts returning. Callahan misses, and Scorpio returns with fully automatic fire.
Yes.
And so they have this shootout, and then he gets away. Basically, is the end
that's
right?
the gist of it,
right? And it's weird. I remember thinking this scene was weird because or maybe it's not this one. Is it this one, or is it? I think it's this one. They just cut from night to day, and they're driving back to the department, right? With little said about it.
Yeah, that's right. The trends, there's a segue is not very.
I get the sense
there.
that there was something there that might have been caught.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable.
Right.
So essentially, the next thing that happens of importance is that we learn Scorpio has kidnapped and married Deacon.
Yes.
And he leaves the police another ransom letter.
Yep.
Callahan says that she's already dead. The mayor doesn't care. He wants to pay Scorpio off.
Right. So Scorpio wants $200,000.
Yeah, and no funny business. So
Right. And we both, so basically the police have decided they're going to pay him and try to get the girl.
And they need a bagman
They need
to
a
do it.
bagman, and they choose Callahan. So
yes. And importantly, he's instructed that he has to go alone, no backup.
Yes, that's right.
And deliver the money to Scorpio.
Now, we thought this was implausible at best, that this cop, Callahan, who's been portrayed as violating the rules at every turn and being a major thorn in the side of his authority figures, they would pick him and say, no funny stuff, right?
Yes. However, well, no, the way that the film resolves this is after Callahan agrees to do this particular mission, Chico makes the comment, no wonder they call him Dirty Harry. He gets the shit end of the stick.
Right. So actually at this moment, Chico's mad about this. And so you can kind of see he starts to side with Callahan.
Yes.
And he's like,
and
this
they,
is
they both
bullshit.
get booted from their boss's office.
Yes.
He tells them to get the hell out. Also, I'd note that at this point, the kind of running, why do they call him Dirty Harry, is no longer interesting.
Yes.
We have now 4 explanations for why he's called Dirty Harry. Just doesn't really matter anymore.
Right. So they decided that Callahan's going to drop this off, but that Chico is going to listen to, he's going to have something where he can listen to what's happening, and he's going to follow.
Yeah, and I think
Callahan.
another interesting detail before Callahan starts his mission to be the bagman is Callahan has a switchblade which he brandishes, and then he asks this other officer for Scotch tape so he can tape it to his ankle. And the other officer says, quote, "It's disgusting that a police officer should know how to use that weapon." To which my response is, it's a knife. Literally anybody knows how to use a knife.
Right. It's a weird, almost inexplicable line of dialogue, except for it seems to be, again, making the point that this chief is completely like out of.
This isn't the chief. I believe it's the lieutenant.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So the lieutenant,
he just sits on his ass.
They sit on their ass and they don't understand what it's like in the streets.
And Harry understands that sometimes on the street you have fisticuffs. Like it's not pretty. You
got to use dirty weapons. Right. So he tapes this. They go through. He gets some calls from Scorpio.
So basically, the long and short of this is, he has to answer the pay phone within 4 rings, according to Scorpio.
By the way, this clearly influenced Die Hard 3.
3, yes.
Where they're chasing pay phones around.
So they send Callahan on a little bit of a goose chase for Scorpio.
Right.
So again, it's also interesting because along with the kind of patrolling scenes earlier, you can see like Dirty Harry has multiple films within it, right?
Yeah.
In an interesting way. Like it's stylistically, it kind of bounces around. I think it works pretty well, but it is interesting that you have.
There are kind of multiple ideas, and I think we said before, it feels as though it's like 3 or 4 scripts put together, and it's not always clear that they are like consistent, or I mean, you wouldn't say that this is like aesthetically pure if you're into that kind of a thing.
It's like one writer thought he was just writing a pure action movie, like a B movie that would just be action. And another of the writers was like, nah, this is a political commentary on what happens with, liberalism. So it does have a little bit of a not incoherence, but a little bit of a multi-layered kind of feel to it.
I would say it's somewhat aesthetically jarring, but maybe the jazz soundtrack works with that there's some kind of jazz element to the film. It's
just a freewheeling, who knows what's going to happen from scene to scene.
They go to this park, and here they have very interesting shots, which we're not sure that they ever really do anything with, but he's told to go to this cross.
Well, first, importantly, because this plays with the theme of gay men and debauchery, right?
Oh yes, yes.
So he's going into this park to meet Scorpio, and he encounters this gay male who's clearly looking for another gay male who is very effeminate, introduces himself as Alice, and says he likes to do dares or something along those lines. Right. And then says to Callahan, if you're part of the Vice Squad, I'll kill myself. And Callahan makes the quip, do it at home then, right?
Right.
Which is, again,
this is a scene that just should be caught. I mean, it
absolutely should be. Again, it's inexplicable that it's in the final film, except for, again, you get this kind of feel that you're in a city that is it's kind of a Gomorrah. It's on the precipice of disaster as traditional moral values are eroded.
Right. It's just illustrating the sort of overall seediness of San Francisco in the 70s, right?
And nothing says seediness more than being propositioned in a park, right?
Right. So then he's told to go to this cross.
Yes. And
by Scorpio, who's hiding somewhere.
And this scene, the shot, it's a huge statue, cement statue of a cross.
Yeah.
There's a beautiful symmetrical shot. The cross is right in the middle. It's nighttime, and Callahan is walking right toward it. It's very, there's an interesting Christian symbolism.
Because there's also a majestic shot.
Yes.
From Callahan's POV.
Yeah, where he's looking up.
Yes. That makes it look absolutely sublime. It kind of reminds me of the painting. There's a painting by Caravaggio, I believe, that takes that angle or close to it, at least, with Jesus on the cross.
I'm definitely familiar with Caravaggio's entire oeuvre.
I figured as much.
As are all of our viewers, I'm
absolutely.
Sure. But this symbolism.
It's interesting. So is it suggesting that Dirty Harry is some kind of weird Christ figure in the way that, say, RoboCop is in the movie RoboCop, and maybe we'll do that one later, but they're definitely explicit Christ connections with RoboCop.
Yeah,
and maybe here they're trying to make some with Dirty Harry.
Yeah, I read the perspective that Harry is kind of absorbs all of the sins of the city himself. Like, that's his albatross to bear. So now that's I think a little bit of a not tendentious, but a little bit of a forced reading, but there certainly is some interesting Christian symbolism that would play into Cale's view that it's, medieval fascism.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's that forced of a reading. The cross is definitely there on purpose, right? I mean, there's a reason Siegel and Eastwood chose the cross. And as we noted, in Gran Torino, there's an explicit comparison between Walt and Jesus at the end, and that Walt dies so that others could live. And so this is something that is not foreign to Eastwood, clearly. So it is interesting that they put this in here anyway. So again, illustrating that Dirty Harry is not just an action film, right? There's a lot going on in this film.
Yeah. And so this scene, we'll just summarize it quickly. So Harry is beaten quite severely by Scorpio. Right. Chico, his partner, is shot and out of commission. At one point, it's interesting because all three of the lead characters are on the ground, right?
Yeah, they're all wounded.
Importantly, Callahan saves himself with his switchblade. So after he's beaten, he takes the switchblade out and stabs Scorpio in the leg with it.
Also, two other important things. One, confirming Harry's intuition.
Yes.
Scorpio says, I'm just going to let Ann Deacon die, and I just wanted to tell you. And also, at this point, we can see what a great and very bizarre actor Robinson is, because he plays Scorpio in this scene as just this very weird, sadistic person who makes bizarre sounds.
Yes.
And so we know that. And then Harry has the wherewithal to say, "Don't kill him."
To Chico, his partner.
Chico starts shooting, yes, and then he stabs him, and Scorpio runs away.
Right. So again, it not only does it confirm Harry's instincts about Scorpio, but also it confirmed his instinct to bring the switchblade with him, because that was literally correct. What saved his life.
Yes, and then so it moves from here so quickly. I think this scene is like not terribly important, where we see Harry has cracked ribs and a busted up face. He takes a plug of alcohol with his.
Chico's in the hospital, but we know
Chico got shot. He's in the hospital. Live. Yep. And then they get a call that somebody went to the doctor.
Mm-hmm. And was treated for a leg injury.
Right. So Harry goes there. Two broken ribs and a busted up face. It's not going to stop Harry. He goes to the doctor. The doctor eventually says he's the grounds crew or land keeper.
The groundskeeper allows this Scorpio to stay at Kezar Stadium.
Right. So immediately, of course, Callahan and
his partner, who's not Chico now, because Chico's out of commission.
Chico's out.
Yeah, they go to the stadium grounds, and I think this is an interesting scene, because there's a fence that's locked, and Callahan and the other officer kind of look through it, and the officer says, "Illegal entry, no warrant." Callahan responds, "Looks like we climb." And then the cop responds, "Too much linguini, I'll find another way." This cop is overweight and clearly not masculine enough to do the job.
Right. So again, it's a criticism of these cops who are, one, they just abide to strict legalese. So they're like, that would be illegal, can't do it. And also they're so out of shape that they're incapable of being effective police.
Right. And from the legal standpoint, I like the idea that you're on the tail of this guy who has a kidnapped female.
Yes.
There's a very plausible case that this is the person who has her kidnapped.
Right.
And the idea is that you still can't actually enter the property. That's not even actually his. It's not his home.
So
it's a stadium.
Seems implausible, although it may illustrate something of the fear that police officers had in the 60s and 70s about what actually would count as an appropriate search and seizure and what would get thrown out. Because a lot of this jurisprudence, was new in the 50s and 60s and undoubtedly caused concern among police officers. So I guess you have that element. But at any rate, of course.
But we're supposed to believe that a seasoned detective, such as Harry Callahan, doesn't understand the law well enough.
I think he doesn't, because later on, and we'll talk about this, he's clearly clueless about the new regulations. Basically says then the law is stupid.
Right. We will note that. I'm just noting there's some implausibility here.
Oh yeah, there definitely is. But at any rate, Callahan climbs the fence, and then for some inexplicable reason, Scorpio, who has been hiding.
Yeah, and he has an entire stadium with which he can hide.
Stadium. It's dark. It's night. For some reason, begins to run away
with a bad leg,
wounded leg, and making a lot of noise. So Callahan eventually pursues him in one of the, I think, iconic scenes in the film. He pursues him into this football field, and then his partner turns on the lights in the field.
Yeah. And then Callahan, there's a nice zoom shot of him holding the 44 out, and he shoots Scorpio in the calf.
Yes.
Scorpio again makes some shrill
he makes some weird
ululations.
noises, but and also importantly, Callahan tells his partner to hit it.
Yeah, so that's I have that dialogue, which is amusing. So Callahan wings Scorpio, who falls to the ground, starts making these weird noises. Callahan's running to approach him, and then the other cop asks, "Do you need any help?" And Harry responds, uh, quite, I'd say, curtly and abruptly. Well, that's redundant. Quite curtly, "Go on and get some air, fatso."
Right.
So at this point, I think we could say that there's something of a change in Callahan's character from being cynical but good-natured to outright uh, hostility and anger.
Yeah, so at this point he's angry. He's angry. He has no time for this. He tells his
Yes,
partner to take a walk
yes,
so
and then
that he can torture.
he confronts Scorpio, begins to torture him, and importantly, Scorpio tells him he wants a lawyer, that he has the right for a lawyer.
Right. So this is where the movie starts to get pretty didactic because
Yes.
Scorpio is taking advantage of. That's how I think
he's taking advantage of this
these
liberal environment for
Right.
The rights of criminals that
Right.
in the view of this film protects criminals at the expense of victims.
Right, because Eastwood wants to know where is the girl, and the response of Scorpio is, "I want a lawyer. Basically, don't kill me." He's sort of sniveling and begging and saying he knows his rights.
And then
it zooms. So this is a famous shot, and it's something that I don't know if Dirty Harry started this, but it's where I first noticed it. It has this zoom pan out from a helicopter, goes all the way from this action scene where Scorpio's on the ground in the football field, and then pans out
to this kind of bird's eye view of the.
Now, interestingly, the film ends with the bird's eye zoom out as well. So this is a technique that is repeated in this film.
And the modern viewer looks at this and thinks, well, who cares? You could do this with a $300 drone. But at this time, that required some sophisticated technology to actually do that shot and make it look solid.
Yes.
So that I think the next scene is the most emotionally potent and beautifully shot scene.
Yeah, it's sort of I would say it's the artistic peak of the film.
Yes, and so in this next scene, there's Deacon's body is pulled, naked body is pulled from a drain pipe, and she's lovingly set onto a stretcher,
clearly dead.
Yes, and then it cuts to Harry looking over the Golden Gate Bridge in the background, and it's a very dark bluish color to
so
the
at this
shot.
point, I guess it would be morning, right?
Yeah.
And
so this is a shot that one reviewer noted that there's a very similar shot in Heat with Robert De Niro looking out a window that's also very dark colored, like black and blue.
That is right. Yeah, that's interesting. There definitely is. So this is a shot that was memorable enough that Michael Mann paid homage to it later in his great cop film.
And it could even be a mawkish scene were it not for the fact that Harry doesn't say anything. He's just looking over the city.
They have no dialogue.
It's very well done.
But this is right after this is where we'll get the heavy-handed part of the script.
This is the in-your-face didacticism in this next scene where Harry is in the district attorney's office with District Attorney Rothko, and importantly, presumably a liberal judge, but also professor at the University of Berkeley, right?
Yep.
So in this scene, there's a lot of famous dialogue, but some of the famous lines.
So we should say that the district attorney is he begins by saying, I've been reading your arrest report.
Yeah.
And Harry thinks he's going to congratulate him. So this is where the kind of humor is like Harry's like, well, I got a little bit lucky.
Yeah. You know, sometimes things just fall the right way.
Right.
And instead, DA Rothko says, you're lucky I'm not indicting you for assault with intent to commit murder.
Right.
Harry gets an incredulous look at his face and says, what? And then Rothko says, where the hell does it say that you've got a right to kick down doors, torture suspects, deny medical attention and legal counsel? Where have you been? Does Escobedo ring a bell? Miranda?
I think I said Escobar before. So yeah, excuse me, Escobedo.
I mean, you must have heard of the Fourth Amendment. What I'm saying is that man had rights. And then Callahan issues this snarky, well, I'm all broken up about that man's rights.
Right. So let's note here how incredibly implausible this is, because this is Callahan's arrest report that he has
his own report that he wrote up.
So apparently the idea is that when he wrote his own report, he discussed all of these extra legal behaviors he participated in.
Right. He said at this point, I denied
at this point, I tortured the suspect and denied medical attention.
Yeah, it's incredibly implausible. This is what happens when making a in-your-face political point overrides the actual script. So it's an example of telling, not showing.
Yeah,
in a very, very ham-handed way.
Right. And so, I mean, they run through this. So this guy's chastising Callahan. And Callahan does at least make one good point about, well, this woman was dying. Like, I had to get to her. And then the DA basically says, like, yeah, that might be a good point. But then
she was already dead.
Yeah, she was already dead. He said, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And then he says, yeah, but even if, you know, that was okay, you tortured this guy. And then the judge says, yeah, I'd have to throw this out.
Right, the Berkeley liberal. And then another important part of that dialogue, Callahan asks, are you trying to tell me that ballistics can't match the bullet up to this rifle? And Rothko says, it doesn't matter what ballistics can do. The rifle might make a nice souvenir, but it's inadmissible as evidence. And then Callahan asks, and who says that? And the DA responds, it's the law. Callahan says, with indignity, righteous indignation, well, then the law is crazy. Right? Again, making the point that he's for common sense justice, and the people recognize that these are idiotic laws. Like, who cares about the rights of Ann Deacon? Why do we care about Scorpio's rights so much?
He even says, they're talking about victims' rights, and then he says, who speaks for her?
Right.
So this is...
he's playing populist again.
Yes, he is. And in interviews with Eastwood is sort of notoriously terse in interviews, and he's not particularly insightful. So he's an interesting director, writer, actor, because he's incredibly intelligent and he makes these very symbolically rich and thematic films, but then he pretends that he's just kind of a yokel and he's like, who cares? And basically the only thing he says about this film is, you know, it was about who's speaking up for, I'm sorry, I said victims' rights earlier. I meant criminals' rights, because the Callahan perspective is who's speaking up for the victim. And that's what Eastwood says about this film, is like, who's talking about victims' rights?
Right. So if you ask Eastwood to give a summary of the film, he has like this laconic, it's about the rights of victims, basically.
Right.
That's as much as he's going to give you. Right. And similarly, when people ask him if Gran Torino is in any way a reflection upon his own cinema persona, he will just say something like, that's interesting, but I didn't think about that at all.
Right. So he
very
pretends or feigns to have no insight into these things,
Correct.
which is interesting because he clearly does. So at this point, we get like this really heavy-handed display. We're shown we're not shown. We're told. We're explicitly told what the theme of the movie is, basically, or at least one of the themes of the movie.
And I would note that if you're reading this literally, you have to blame Harry Callahan for what's happened here. Because here he is, this seasoned police detective who clearly knows these cases. I mean, he's on the street investigating homicide 365 days a year. And he fucks this thing up so bad by just handing in this police report where he confesses his crimes.
Right.
That Scorpio is allowed to go free again. Right. It's now the way the scene plays, we hate the district attorney and we hate the Berkeley professor. Yeah. But in reality, as if you think about it, it's really on Harry. It's complete incompetence on his part.
Right. And this is the power of perspective in a film, that when you tell the film from Harry's perspective, you're sort of rooting for him automatically. And so of course you're like, these people are being jackasses. Harry did the right thing. And then furthermore, I think it illustrates the hazard, and this is where the script fails, the hazard of making your moral point more important than any kind of realistic script development. Because to make your point here, you actually have to end up making Callahan a complete and incompetent jackass,
right?
Who's completely confused and blindsided by all of these laws that have been around for a while. Right. And in fact, he's so stupid about it that he writes it right into his own arrest report.
Right. Callahan's understanding of the law is apparently
right.
It's not even up to like a middle school student's capacity to understand.
Right. And then the other thing that you need to do in the script is make the DA this hostile adversary instead of somebody who would say to Callahan, like in the most plausible scene, he would be like, dude, look, like maybe we should leave like one of these things out, or maybe you should frame it this way or whatever. I mean, he does have the line where he's like, I have kid, I have a daughter or something. I want this guy off as much as you.
It's not compelling.
No, it's not. So this is like Max, whereas the earlier scene, the cerulean scene of Callahan against the Golden Gate Bridge might be the aesthetic peak of the film. This is certainly the aesthetic nadir of the film.
Yeah, and also it's amusing when Callahan's leaving the DA's office, he makes a comment about Scorpio will kill again. And the DA insanely asked him, how do you know? It's like, dude, this guy has already killed 4 people?
Right. And he's like, how do you know? And Eastwood and Callahan's response is, because he likes it.
Right. Just an incredibly implausible, overwrought scene that is
whole thing should have been caught.
Not necessary.
Right. In fact, like, if you were going to make this, make the rights, the criminal versus the victim's rights angle, you could have easily done it by just having them overthrow the case, right? And then just go from there. No need for the heavy-handed, in-your-face dialogue here, but they have it.
Yes, they do.
And it's actually famous, so I guess it's one of those things where you could argue it has a lot of cultural resonance, even though it has to be judged an aesthetic or artistic failure.
Yes, it is. One might go so far as to say it's a moral failure of the film. No,
possibly.
So after this scene, he sees Chico, who's recovering. And that scene's not really that interesting, except for Chico tells Callahan that he's probably not coming back to be a
Right.
police officer.
Right. And importantly, in this scene, Callahan walks out with Chico's wife, or I think it's his wife.
Yeah.
And in fact, we get the background information on Callahan that his wife was killed by a drunk driver who just veered over the line. And it's interesting. I don't know how I feel about this. Actually, I was thinking about it. It's kind of interesting that they put this in here, and they don't linger on the background of any of the characters.
No.
Maybe that's actually a plus of the film, that you just get this bit that maybe one reason Callahan's so cynical and misanthropic and willing to break the rules is because of what happened to his wife, but they don't dwell on it.
No, it is interesting that when he explains it, he says, just in kind of a throwaway comment, no real reason for it, right? There was no reason that, just that's the dude, nature is red in tooth and claw. There's no rhyme or reason to the ways of the universe.
Right. And I think that, that just is in keeping with the world weary cynicism of Callahan. It's just like shit happens and that it's inexplicable. There's no good reason for it.
Yep. So then Callahan, before the kind of culminating scenes, Callahan follows Scorpio around on his own time.
Yeah, and this again, you can kind of see the film I don't know what happened here, but it's kind of like running out of steam, or it's more half-assed at this point, because so he's following around Scorpio. Scorpio hires somebody to beat the living shit out of him.
Yes, he hires a criminal. He pays a criminal $200
to beat the shit out of him,
beat him to a pulp. And in that scene, interestingly, as he's getting pummeled, he appears to enjoy it, right?
Yes.
So there's some sort of homoerotic type undertones. Yeah, just a bizarre scene. And then he also goes to some seedy Roaring Twenties club where there are a bunch of naked people in a band playing.
Yeah, so
Callahan's in there. Again, no real reason for it, except it kind of shows that this Scorpio is a pervert and there's this dark underbelly to the city.
I don't mind either of these scenes really, and the sort of atmosphere of decadence. What I mind is that after they have, so they're clearly trying to make this point again, that Scorpio is taking advantage of the system and the liberal media's excessive concern for those who are accused of crimes. And so he gets his ass beat and then blames it on Callahan.
Yeah, so this is the setup. Like he deliberately, he paid this guy to beat the shit out of him and then used it to elicit sympathy and accuse Harry Callahan of beating him.
Right. So it's clearly like the idea is like this liberal media, and he's getting interviewed.
Yeah.
They're asking him as they're dragging him into the hospital, like, do you know who did this to you? And he's like, yes, like Callahan did it. And
the same guy who tried to frame me.
Right. And they play this on the news, and at some point, like Callahan's bosses play it for Callahan and whatever. And
I think that's actually important. So after that's played on the news, Callahan is talking to the chief of the police, not just his boss, the top brass.
Right.
And the chief says at the end of their conversation, before I let you go, let's get one thing straight. I don't want any more surveillance. And then Harry responds, neither does he. And then the chief says, what does that mean? As if he can't figure out that Harry is saying, you're being favorable to the criminal here.
Right.
But again, it's just this other scene where it's the top brass, like they wouldn't be tailgating Scorpio at this point.
Like tailing, I think.
Tailing.
There may be some tailgating as well. Yes. But yes, it's just Right. So again,
It's unnecessary at this point because we've
Right.
established the theme that the top brass suck.
Right. And
They
also
don't really care about doing good police work. They care more about
just the
abiding by these, yeah,
appearances.
the kind of liberal facade.
Right.
And
There's also I mean, Callahan says, I didn't do that because if I did, he wouldn't look so good. So he's
yes,
basically saying, motherfucker, if I did it, this guy's face would be completely collapsed in. And
but
it's
also I want to know, it is really bad writing as well to have Callahan tailing him, but leaving Scorpio completely alone at this point, right?
yeah, it's weird.
Why doesn't Callahan just take him out, right? I mean, he's
Which is
spending
what
all of
he wants to do
right.
anyway.
He's spending all of this time talking about these liberal do-gooders who don't actually have what it takes to get the job done. He has ample opportunity to be a vigilante here, and he just doesn't take the opportunity. Instead, he lets Scorpio do his thing.
Right. And yes, it is weird. And that's why I say, I think like the last, I don't know, 40 minutes sort of, I don't know what's, it just seems like some of these themes were tacked on, or they didn't really elaborate them very well at the end here. And
I almost think that if the Golden Gate Bridge scene were the last scene of the film and it just ended there, it would be much more effective.
I don't even disagree with that. Yeah,
right.
if you
It wouldn't
just saw
be quite
that
as didactic, and
he got away with it,
right.
or well, I guess we don't know what's going to happen with the arrest.
Leave that up in the air, though.
Yeah.
Right. We already have all of the characters developed as well as they're going to be developed.
Yes, that is
we know
true.
the score. Scorpio maybe gets away with it, maybe doesn't, but
right.
And Mary Deacon didn't have to die.
Did it, and it's tragic. Yeah.
Right.
So at any rate, they Scorpio decides he's going to hijack a bus.
Yes, a bus of school children.
Right.
Now, I will say Andrew Robinson, again, does some virtuoso acting here.
Yes,
he has the children sing children's songs, and he starts singing them, including Old MacDonald. It is quite riveting viewing, I will say.
It's riveting in that it's very disturbing.
Yes.
And at a couple of points, he's like angry because they won't sing, and he's like yelling at them to sing, or he's going to kill their mothers.
Yeah.
So I guess the idea is this is one thing with this character that maybe is a flaw with the writing, is that it's hard to understand what the hell the point of his crimes are, because here apparently he's trying to get money in a plane, right? Mm-hmm. And he wants them to meet him.
Yeah.
And then we get this scene in which the actual mayor is talking to Callahan.
This is the mayor's character arc is from one of being slightly pusillanimous to complete debasement here.
Right.
Just utterly debases himself. So in this scene, Scorpio makes a ransom demand.
Right. So he's demanded the money
to the mayor.
He's hijacked this boss.
Now, Harry says, again, this is kind of inexplicable dialogue. So Harry says to the mayor, when will you stop messing around with this guy? He has to be stopped now. We forget about the last 10 minutes where Harry has had plenty of opportunities to stop him, but has done nothing.
Right.
So just set that to the side. But then the mayor says, he's got a busload of kids and I can't take the chance. I gave my word of honor to Scorpio and he will not be molested. That is a direct order.
Right. And this is really weird because you see this scene where right before this, Scorpio's talking to him, and the mayor says to him, I give you my word of honor that you won't be harmed.
He's almost polite when he's on the phone with Scorpio.
Correct. But then you just think, well, of course he's just going to say that to him and he's lying and they're going to capture him. But no, in fact, the mayor sincerely intends to give him the money, or at least the film suggests it, to give him the money and let him go in exchange for the kids. And he even, this line of dialogue, which as you said, is totally inexplicable. He actually makes a point of saying, I gave this guy my word and how I cannot go against that.
Right. And this is after they've already had a ransom that went completely awry.
That not to I mean to add, what's important to add about that is that the Scorpio was fucking with them the whole time and the woman was going to die.
Right.
So we know they know who they're dealing with, a complete sadist who has no scruple about lying. And for some reason.
And also inexplicably, Dirty Harry says, find yourself another bagman.
No. I don't think that's inexplicable. This makes sense to me. So at this point, the mayor again, now what's inexplicable is why would they again try to give Dirty Harry the job?
Yes. So they again want Harry to be the bagman and make the delivery, even after he completely fucked up the other one, violated the Bill of Rights, etc.
Supposedly,
in the film portrays it.
In the film world, yes. And to me, this makes sense. Which Dirty Harry says, "No, I'm not going to do it. Get yourself another bagman." So I think the point here is Callahan's done with it. He's not even going to try to play by their rules anymore.
That's fair.
Yeah. So at this point, he's going complete like Terminator mode, right?
Yeah, he's going rogue. He's becoming the man with no name in a Sergio Leone film, right? He's off the grid.
And I think it's illustrated that he's just gone completely wild. Because he catches
he's a
up to the
feral
bus.
Creature at this point,
right? And he catches up to the bus.
I think that scene is actually I love the scene. So it has the buses driving down the freeway, and it zooms to this bridge, and you just see like all 6'4" of Clint Eastwood standing there, in Terminator mode, waiting, and Scorpio becomes a bit unsettled by seeing him.
Yeah, he's like, how's this guy here? What's going on? And the bus goes under this bridge. Callahan jumps off of the bridge on top of the bus.
Yep.
And what should be noted here, because I paid attention to this, I was like, okay, so the bus is driving around with Callahan on top, and I thought, I wonder how similar the stunt actor looks to Eastwood. I was like, that's pretty amazing. So I looked this up, and it turns out Eastwood did this stunt himself. Mm-hmm. And it looks pretty good. I was pretty impressed with this. So at this point, the bus driver has been smacked down, and Scorpio's driving the bus with Harry Callahan on top. And, he's swerving.
Third graders in the bus. Right. Which I don't think they do anything with them after this. No, they don't.
So they break into this. I don't know what this is, like a kind of mill place or something.
It's like a cement quarry.
Yeah, by water.
Yeah, some ponds.
Scorpio, they crash the bus. Scorpio runs out. Callahan flies off of the bus.
Right.
Scorpio runs
out.
Yeah.
They have your kind of run-of-the-mill action chase shoot scene.
Right. Pretty standard, well shot, but perfectly ordinary chase shoot scene. But then
there's a kid who's fishing in this kind of man-made pond.
Yes.
And Scorpio runs out on the dock and grabs the kid, holds a gun to his head, and in the scene, Callahan looks as if he's going to drop his weapon, and then quickly pulls up the gun and shoots Scorpio in the shoulder. The kid goes free and starts running.
Right.
And this sets up the final confrontation.
Right. So whereas what came before was, very competently done, but not terribly interesting action. This is a great conclusion, I will say. Even though I like the ending at the bridge better, this is still great for the movie. So Callahan walks up to him. He's there. Scorpio's there, wounded, and he's got his gun by him, and he's kind of looking at it. And Callahan gives the exact same speech he gave to the black bank robber earlier about how he knows what you're thinking. Did he fire 5 times or 6? Blah, blah, blah. Being this is a 44 mag. And then what's different here and what makes this great, the way that Eastwood delivers it is awesome. Because at this point he's growling it and he's angry and he says, "Do you punk?" And you can tell he has contempt at this
complete
point.
Disdain.
Yes.
The feral animal nature of masculinity has been unleashed.
Right. And the show, and again, Robinson does great acting throughout. So he's looking, and then you can tell he gets this look like, fuck it, I'm going for it.
Bad idea. I mean, to be fair, he was going to get clipped either way.
Right. So he goes for his gun. And of course, Callahan puts a 44 slug through his chest and he flies off into the water.
The pond. And then importantly, Callahan then takes out his badge from his wallet.
Yes.
Looks at it with disgust and flings it into the same pond that Scorpio has fallen dead into.
Right. And now, and in this, and then it ends as
it zooms out. Now,
similar
to the stadium zoom out.
This is interesting because Eastwood originally did not want to throw the badge.
Yes.
Siegel had to convince him to.
Yeah.
Or actually, Eastwood convinced Siegel not to include it. But then when they were filming it, Eastwood decided, no, like that was a good idea. And Siegel's argument was, it's not that you're,
because Eastwood was concerned.
The police.
Yeah, Eastwood was concerned that it made Harry Callahan look like a quitter.
Right. And Siegel said it's about the badge at this point represents the bureaucracy, and throwing it suggests that you're eschewing the bureaucracy. Now, I think we could argue that that's a bad reading of the film, and it does a little bit to kind of undermine the symbolism that they started the film with, right? Because at the start,
a little bit.
A lot, yeah.
Doesn't it completely negate the opening scene that's in memory of all these officers, and the end is somebody shitting on the badge?
Yeah, it's weird because, because it starts with the badge too, and it ends with the badge. And it's weird because if you had consistent meaning with the badge, right? If the badge had been associated with bureaucracy throughout or something, then it would make a lot more sense.
Yeah, in one way, if you think about.
But by the way, just before you say that, it's also important to note that's an homage to High Noon with Gary Cooper, right?
Yeah. Whereas, but I would argue in High Noon it works. It's very effective because throwing the badge is not spitting on the law or police officers. It's an act of disgust for the cowardice that the town showed.
Yes, agreed.
Whereas in this case, it is like a repudiation of police officers.
Yes.
And in one sense, though, like there's if you simply viewed this film as this anachronistic character from Westerns, from the world of the Western, gets transported into an urban environment in the 1970s and is facing off against evil. Everything in the film really kind of makes sense, right?
Yes.
Like that just straightforward view that, hey, dude, that you want to find out what Eastwood would be if you took like the Sergio Leone character and put him in 1970s San Francisco. Wouldn't that be kind of fun?
Yeah, and that's what you would get.
Right, and you get this really extremely well done, entertaining film. I think the real issue is the in-your-face political didacticism interferes with that.
Before we get into that, we'll spend like the last 10 minutes here discussing that. What is your quick estimation of the film? In these podcasts, we'll give 1 out of 10 and just a very quick statement, and then we'll discuss that in further detail before ending.
So I would give it 8 out of 10. It's an extremely effective, well-directed film with notable flaws that prevents it from being a masterpiece.
Okay, so I agree with everything you said, although I'll give it a 9 out of 10 because it also has so much cultural resonance that you have to give it credit for that.
Yeah, fair
And
enough.
although I don't think it's in the same category in terms of actual just pure aesthetics as, say, I don't even think it's actually as good as Bullet, even though I like it better. And it's not in the same category as The French Connection.
Agreed, yeah.
For cultural resonance, it is. So I have to give it credit for that. And the thing that really stuck with me this time that I viewed it, which I think is the third or fourth time I've seen it, is how well directed it is, and how great the cinematography is, and the soundtrack, and how the editing as well, and how it all really works together to make a very high quality and aesthetically interesting work that is only, and well acted, that is only really marred by a heavy-handed, in-your-face script. And some missteps that we talked about, like this badge throwing. It's not clear to me what that's supposed to do, etc. So let's just talk about like a little bit of that to conclude that we both think it's somewhat marred by its excessive didacticism, right?
Yeah, although, I mean, we'd have to admit that for all of the flaws there, that message was extremely powerful,
right,
for viewers. Like, it's one of the most successful political propaganda films of all time.
Right. So let's note that the fascistic claim, which was made by Kale
completely
and
wrong.
Ebert, is just ludicrous. It's not even. I don't. Fascism to liberals just means bad. Apparently.
Yeah. So let's be clear. If it did have a fascistic ethos, you would have a unified police department, right? That together, as kind of this corporate unit, would just assassinate people willy-nilly. That's not at all what's happening in the film.
Troops going out and in fact, it's the second film in which you have this assassination squad.
That's the fascist.
And actually Harry is opposed to them.
Exactly.
That's
such a incredibly misguided medieval fascism. Like, what?
Right. Just
what does that even mean?
Really bizarre. Yes. And in fact, the very points that the Dirty Harry film was trying to make, the fact that these liberal critics melted down about it actually illustrates and provides support for the thesis of the film to some degree.
Right. I mean, in a way, you could view it as the directors and perhaps Eastwood himself saying this old school way of doing justice that we used to, do maybe in the 30s and 40s. Obviously in the Westerns, there was something to that. When you have a complete sociopath who's unfettered from any norms or values, such as Scorpio, the only way that you can take that person out is to have a similar kind of sociopathic, in a way, figure on the side of the law.
See, now I don't read it that way, and I don't like that reading of it. I'll tell you why. Because I don't think it needs to be I think you could interpret it that way, and that's certainly a theme in a lot of other films, but I think it makes it less interesting. I think the charitable reading is, in the 50s and 60s, liberals went way overboard, and they took what we understood as common sense justice and concern about victims, and they made it this bureaucratic maze that you can't expect police officers to navigate effectively. And the ones who can navigate it effectively are actually ineffective at their real jobs. And now you have a police department staffed with a bunch of hyper-educated bureaucrats who don't know how to do police work. And Callahan is the kind of guy who can do police work. He's extremely dedicated to his job, and he uses intuition. He's a little bit overboard in that, I mean, he says, just shooting people who intend to commit rape obviously is a problem. But the more charitable reading of him is he's just somebody who abided by the system that you had before all of these liberal excesses. And that would be like the charitable reading of it, right?
Yes, but the more that I think about it, the more I view Dirty Harry as just being like an urban Western, right? Like, what's the difference? So in most of these great Westerns, it's also the case that the other sheriffs or the people who are deputized are also completely incompetent, and that's why you need the kind of cynical stoic gunman to restore order. This has all of those themes in it. I guess the only difference is adding the political didacticism.
Yes, no, I agree. I mean, I agree with that. It definitely plays like a Western put into a big city. I agree. Yes, I think.
I mean, you could imagine
that downplays the political commentary, especially like the 60s increasing crime and debauchery of the city, so which is an important part of
instead of having the law is corrupted through bribery, or they work with the enemy, which is like common in Westerns. Mm-hmm. Instead of that, it's the law is corrupted by the liberal order.
Yeah,
right.
Like,
but very similar in both cases.
Also, there's definitely a connection to the Coen brothers. There will be blood. No Country for Old Men, because I think there's this, which is I think you could, Cormac McCarthy's sort of have a conservative view of the world and wrote the book. I think there's this. And there is Sugar, who's this sociopath that they can't understand, right?
Right.
He's completely inexplicable to these people. And I think that San Francisco in the 70s and Dirty Harry, it illustrates as just this inexplicable cesspool of crime and just disgusting decadence that these people can't recognize or understand anymore.
But I think
that's an important part of the film.
Yeah, I think importantly, you can't understand Harry either, right? He's an inexplicable character.
Right, yeah.
Like, we have like, he's just bizarre. Like, what makes him tick? Why does he care so much about this?
Right. So I suppose and that makes for an interesting difference or contrast with their No Country for Old Men, because in that story / film, in the film it's Tommy Lee Jones, right? The main character also can't understand what's happening, whereas Dirty Harry, you get the sense he gets what's happening, right? I think like.
Yes.
The city's disgusting and it's in your face with the depravity, but he's meant for that, right? Like,
yes,
he understands it, and he's exactly what you need for that, which is part of probably what was exhilarating about watching it if you were an ordinary person at the time, is so this guy who gets it, who's going to work for the common person.
Right. And that's why setting aside any of the kind of pedantic criticism of the script, the psychological impact of watching it is pretty profound. It's clear. You watch it, you side with Harry, mm-hmm. you side with masculine law enforcement, and you absolutely hate the liberal bureaucrats. Like, your feeling is these effete fuckers are letting people die because they care more about these irrational laws and about criminals than they do a 10-year-old boy or a 20-year-old woman.
Yeah, and that's why I think both Ebert and Cale responded so forcefully to the film. And Ebert I don't remember what Cale says in it, but Ebert admits that this is a high quality, effective film.
Yeah, Cale says the same thing. Like, you can't, she says in one of her lines in the review, it's impossible to deny that it's a well done film.
Right. So there's a particular power to the film, and the argument that it's making, it, as we noted, it undermines itself at some points, but it's very compelling to watch it. And it's
Right. And it would
this,
also, I mean, it is, again, like in 1970, this message would be even more compelling in urban environments
right.
where there was a perception of decay,
Yes.
degeneracy,
Right.
crime rates were increasing rapidly. Like
Yes.
people were afraid to go jogging in Central Park.
Right.
It's not the New York of 2020. It's not
right.
gentrified New York.
And this is like right after the sort of peak of the Warren Court, where you get a lot of these decisions that that do increase the rights of the accused, possibly or probably quite literally at the expense of victims.
And interestingly, I think there is a reading where you would say Dirty Harry is actually an old school Democrat, not him personally, but the way you'd read it is he's this blue collar guy who's like the FDR Truman Democrats. He's looking out for the small guy.
Yeah.
The liberals are no longer, they don't represent that anymore.
Right.
They've moved to all of these more kind of this, not yet professional managerial class, but moving in that direction, like effete professors, concern about like abstract notions of racial justice over the day-to-day concerns of the average person who actually lives in San Francisco.
Concerned about political correctness excessively as well. And this is a kind of, you can see in Clint Eastwood's oeuvre a very kind of populist conservatism, right? And this is displayed probably most prominently in Gran Torino, again, in which is a very populist type film. It's like, yes, you could see this person as a middle class, a blue collar, the person who's looking out for the small guy, actually, the guy that liberals should be, or you think they should be, except for they now are much more educated and concerned about like abstract ideas and identity politics instead of actually protecting people. At least that's the argument that the film's making.
The use of sexual titillation and the portrayal of homosexuality is very off-putting, I think, in my view.
Yes.
I don't think that holds up very well when you watch it with a modern sensibility.
No, if you were going to, I mean, it does convey a sense of the seediness of the city, which I think is important for it. But you would definitely do it differently. But it is weird that Scorpio is such a weird character, because you could have made him like this peace-loving hippie who had some important ideal that was kind of liberal that he was fighting for, but he's really not. He's actually this deranged misogynist, right? Who talks about how the girl has nice breasts. He even puts it in his letter.
Yeah, and he raped her.
Right, and he's just very vulgar and just disgusting. So it is, he's a weird character. And I guess we should say that although the film is excessively didactic in places, it didn't make that decision, which I'll give it credit for, is that it didn't make it completely in your face that it's like the hippie generation is just liberal out of control, spawning these killers, and Dirty Harry's the conservative who has to take.
It kind of does.
Yeah, I guess maybe it does.
Let's be real. I mean,
yeah, maybe it does.
Harry just patrols the city, and everywhere you look, it's just hippie debauchery and homosexuality.
Yes.
And Scorpio, for whatever we would say about him not having big ideas, he's clearly like a young hippie type figure.
Yes. Now, Siegel said he had him wear the peace sign because no matter how depraved and evil you are, how dastardly, when you see yourself as good. I don't know. That doesn't
Yeah.
work for me.
No, it doesn't work in the film. I
It
mean,
certainly doesn't. It's not conveyed in the film, right?
no, in the film, Scorpio is just, again, like, I think he's almost like this blank slate of every concern a conservative would have in the 70s. Like,
Yes.
he's gay, he's effeminate, he's a hippie.
Yes.
No, it is interesting that they have him.
He's a religious bigot.
Yeah, he's a religious bigot. It's interesting that they have him target historically marginalized groups or
Right.
the Catholic priests. That's interesting.
Well,
but
that's
they
the
don't really
religious
do anything with it.
bigotry.
Yeah,
Well, you might say again, an important part of Eastwood's populism is a sense that yes, we're all in it. Like, I don't judge people by their race or anything. What I fucking hate is political correctness and identity politics. So in fact, the dialogue that the guy has about how he hates all of these groups equally is making the point
yeah,
that that Callahan doesn't have racial prejudices.
Yes, I that's fair. There is definitely a potent populist streak that shoots through the film. That's a fact of, I would say.
Right, I agree. And I think that's part of the interesting thing with the Eastwood oeuvre is that kind of populism like that politically incorrect, but inclusive, really, populism of we're all American, like we're all a team, the working class, whatever. There's not a sense of like, oh, I mean, people have attempted to claim that the Dirty Harry movies are like somehow racially bigoted. I don't see that. I don't see that at all
either.
I think you could argue they're somewhat sexist.
Yes.
And that's obviously a complaint that they attempt to respond to, but I don't see the racial bigotry.
I don't either. And to the extent that they're sexist, I think it's just because they represent a more traditional view of masculinity, which is in some sense, right, patriarchal.
Yeah, it's what you get in a more masculinist world in which women are less effective and therefore
right, less
feminine
autonomous.
traits. Yeah, and then feminine traits are derided because they're actually obstacles to achieving goals.
Am I wrong in thinking like really the only women who are portrayed at all in the film are naked? Basically, well, there's Hot Mary, there's the victim.
Chico's wife.
Oh, Chico's. Yeah, a married woman is the only woman who has any dialogue. Right?
Yeah, and she just basically can't deal with his being a police officer, right?
Right. So, I mean, okay, I think that's a good place to stop. My summary would just be highly psychologically effective, masterfully shot, some flaws that prevent it from true masterpiece status, but a lot of cultural resonance. And also, I think at the end of the day, it's hard. Like if the average person watches that, they're going to side with Harry and just think, yeah, that's common sense, man.
Yep.
That's what we need more of that. Fuck the liberal bureaucrats. What are they doing? Why are they trying to stop him?
Right. I agreed. So to conclude, I will say, I wouldn't put it in masterpiece territory because I think there are too many flaws, but there's that kind of ineffable cultural moment that it tapped into, that whatever that is that a film has, where it's just at the exact right time.
Yeah, agreed.
That allows it to live on and to be really a forever film, an eternal film. And also, and importantly, unlike some films that or books or works of arts, I'm thinking, for example, of Hillbilly Elegy, the book that just tapped into the milieu at the right time, but isn't really a great read.
Yeah,
I think Dirty Harry is a very, very good, if not great, film that managed to do that.
Agreed. All right, so this is Neutral Disaster, and we'll see you at the movies.